We've purified the DNA from our ancient specimen, and we're pretty much ready to go and sequence.
And we want to take every single one of these little sequences and piece them all back together again to make the entire human genome sequence for this ancient person.
For over a century, the Minoans have been called Europe's first great civilization, a people of art, palaces, and mystery who vanished without explanation.
We want to believe that science doesn't have all the answers. We want to believe that there is something out there we can connect with spiritually, and that hasn't really been polluted by being the subject of scientific discovery.
Their language remains unread, their achievements unmatched for their time, their disappearance unexplained.
We can't decipher their language. We only have their archaeological remains. But what that tells us, I think, is that they were extremely imaginative. They were extremely adventurous.
Archaeologists thought the puzzle had gone cold, but now, new DNA evidence has exposed something no one saw coming: the myth and mystery of the Minoans. Before Greece had kings or Rome had power, a great civilization rose on the island of Crete. They were called the Minoans, Europe's first advanced civilization and one of its greatest mysteries. For centuries, their name appeared only in myth. Ancient storytellers spoke of a mighty king named Minos who ruled Crete with the help of a half-man, half-bull creature locked inside a labyrinth. To most people, it was just a tale about power and punishment. But some wondered if the legend was hiding fragments of truth buried beneath the island's soil. That question drew a British archaeologist, Sir Arthur Evans, to Crete in 1900. He arrived expecting to find little more than broken pottery and stones. Instead, he uncovered something that changed history. Beneath layers of earth stood the remains of a vast palace complex at a site called Knossos. It stretched over several acres, with staircases, storerooms, courtyards, and light wells that carried sunlight deep underground. The layout was so intricate that it resembled a maze, the very labyrinth the myths described. The walls of Knossos stunned everyone who saw them. They were covered in colorful wall paintings done in bright reds, blues, and yellows. The scenes showed dolphins swimming through waves, graceful women in flowing skirts, and young athletes performing daring leaps over charging bulls. According to reports from early visitors, the art seemed to capture movement, confidence, and joy, proof that the people who lived there celebrated life rather than hiding from fear. The discovery made headlines around the world. Reporters described it as a lost world that looked shockingly modern. Unlike the defensive fortresses of later civilizations, the palace at Knossos had open courtyards and no heavy walls. It appeared to be a place for ceremony, trade, and storage, not for war. Everything about it suggested a society that felt secure and prosperous. Crete's people seemed to have built a civilization that looked outward to the sea instead of turning inward for protection. Evans gave these ancient islanders a name, the Minoans, taken from the mythical King Minos himself. But that decision only deepened the mystery. By naming them after a legend, Evans blurred the line between myth and archaeology. Had he discovered the real people behind the legend, or had he accidentally given a myth new life? Scholars disagreed. They argued that the Minoans must have come from Egypt or the Near East because their art and architecture seemed too advanced for early Europe. Adding to the confusion was their language. The Minoans wrote using a script now known as Linear A, but no one has ever translated it. The symbols record goods and transactions, yet the sounds and meanings remain a mystery. Part of the problem is that scholars do not know what language the script represents. Unlike Linear B, which was later decoded because it turned out to be an early form of Greek, Linear A does not match any known language family. The limited number of surviving tablets and the absence of bilingual texts, the kind that help decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs, have made translation nearly impossible. Without words, their story could only be told through what they left behind: the buildings, the pottery, and the art. Their graves offered little help. Many had been looted long ago, leaving only fragments of jewelry and tools. No long inscriptions or detailed histories survived. For more than a century, their silence has stood as one of archaeology's most haunting gaps. Every painting and artifact seems to speak without sound, a reminder that the Minoans left behind everything except their voice. That silence would challenge scientists for generations, until DNA tests found a way to make the past speak again. Before scientists could uncover who the Minoans truly were, the world first had to remember what they left behind: the rise, the glory, and the mysterious fall of a civilization that seemed too perfect to vanish. The rise and disappearance of a civilization. By 2000 BCE, the island of Crete had become the jewel of the Mediterranean. Its position between Europe, Asia, and Africa made it a meeting point for merchants and sailors. Minoan ships crossed the sea to Egypt, Cyprus, and the Levant, exchanging goods and ideas that linked distant worlds. Their success turned the island into a thriving economy built on trade, craftsmanship, and agriculture. Much of what we know about this period comes not from written records, but from the ruins themselves. Archaeologists uncovered harbors, tools, and storerooms that once held grain, oil, and wine. Fragments of Minoan pottery have been found in Egypt and the Middle East, while foreign jewelry and copper from Cyprus were unearthed in Crete. Even without readable texts, these discoveries map out the Minoan trade routes. The evidence shows that they were not isolated islanders, but skilled sailors who connected continents long before most of Europe had cities. The great palace centers, Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros, reflected that prosperity. Their wide courtyards and richly decorated halls revealed a people confident in their safety. Historians believe this sense of security came from their control of the sea. Minoan fleets kept their waters clear of pirates and rivals. With no need for walls, they built open cities filled with art, ceremony, and light. It was an age of confidence that few civilizations have ever matched. But prosperity, as history often shows, never guarantees safety. Around 1700 BCE, a series of earthquakes shattered the palaces. The Minoans rebuilt stronger than before, reaching their artistic and architectural peak. Yet a few centuries later, disaster struck again. Around 1450 BCE, most palaces outside Knossos burned. Workshops and villages were abandoned. In the ruins, a new script appeared, Linear B, written in an early form of Greek by Mycenaean administrators who had taken control of the island. Why it happened remains uncertain. Some believe the eruption of nearby Thera unleashed tsunamis and famine. Others see signs of invasion, civil unrest, or a slow economic collapse. Whatever the cause, the silence that followed was complete. The great sea empire of Crete had fallen, leaving behind only walls, ruins, and questions. Archaeology could show what they built and how they lived, but who they truly were, that answer would be found only centuries later, hidden inside their bones. The failed search, when science met silence. For decades, scientists tried to uncover the genetic story of the Minoans, but every attempt ended in failure. The challenge was not a lack of bones, but the island itself. Crete's hot summers, humid air, and salty soil had erased nearly all traces of DNA, at least according to the technology available at the time. Early extraction methods weren't advanced enough to recover damaged genetic material, so every search ended in dust. Time had turned most bones into brittle powder. Even when samples were carefully collected, they often crumbled before reaching the lab. Early researchers believed that somewhere inside these remains lay the answer to who the Minoans truly were. Yet every test returned the same message: no readable DNA. The tropical heat acted like an eraser, stripping away the fragile molecules that carry genetic code. Unlike the cool, dry tombs of Egypt or the frozen graves of Siberia, Crete's environment was too harsh. It did not preserve the dead, it devoured them. Scientists refused to give up. According to archived reports, teams from Greece, Britain, and Denmark tried again throughout the late 20th century. They focused on teeth and dense bone fragments, which normally preserve DNA best. But in Crete, even these failed. The heat and humidity had broken down the genetic material inside, leaving only traces too damaged to read. Every time labs attempted to extract DNA, the samples either disintegrated or became contaminated with modern human DNA from archaeologists, collectors, or even tourists. Some researchers blamed the island's mineral-rich soil, which sped up decay, while others said the real problem was centuries of handling without proper protection. The frustration was enormous. Museums held thousands of artifacts, yet not a single authentic DNA strand could be confirmed. Scientists described it as trying to read a book whose ink had been washed away. A few researchers speculated that the island itself seemed determined to guard its secret, refusing to let its first people be known. By the early 2000s, most studies had stopped. Funding faded, and the search went quiet. The world had unearthed the architecture, the art, and the trade routes of the Minoans, but their biological identity remained sealed. Their story was trapped between science and myth, as unreachable as the meaning of their lost language. Then, years later, everything changed. New technology emerged that could pull DNA from places no one had thought to look, a breakthrough that would finally give the Minoans a voice. The revolutionary tool that brought the dead to life. The silence surrounding the Minoans' identity lasted until technology finally caught up with history. The breakthrough came from a new branch of genetics that focused on the petrus bone, the small, dense section of the skull located just behind the ear. It is the hardest bone in the human body, almost as tough as stone. Scientists realized that this tiny structure could protect DNA better than any other part of the skeleton. It was a natural vault, sealing fragments of genetic code for thousands of years. According to reports from the research team, the first tests began in specialized clean labs, where even a single breath of outside air could ruin a sample. Scientists wore full protective suits and worked under filtered airflow. They placed the skull fragments under precision drills and bored a hole no wider than the tip of a pencil into the petrus bone. From that hole, they collected a small amount of fine, chalk-colored dust, less than a teaspoon. Yet inside it was enough DNA to reconstruct an entire genome. The process was delicate and slow. The powdered bone was dissolved in chemical solutions that separated the ancient DNA from modern contamination. Each step required patience, because even the smallest trace of modern human DNA, from a fingerprint, a stray hair, or the air itself, could destroy the results. Every movement was recorded, every vial double-sealed. The scientists described the feeling as both thrilling and terrifying. One mistake could erase years of work. Once the ancient DNA was purified, it was loaded into large sequencing machines, heavy instruments the size of refrigerators that could read billions of genetic letters at once. Over the next several days, those machines analyzed the samples, sorting and matching the fragments of code like pieces of a shattered puzzle. On computer screens, data slowly began to form lines, colors, and sequences, the digital signature of a person who had lived thousands of years ago. According to project members, the moment the first sequence appeared, the room fell silent. After decades of failure, the Minoans finally had a biological voice. The patterns were clear and complete. It was not partial DNA or a faint trace, it was a full genome. For the first time, science had reached across 4,000 years and unlocked the full genetic code of Europe's first great civilization, the complete DNA profile of a Minoan. And what it revealed would not only surprise historians, it would shock them. The first revelation: the farmers who built a kingdom. The first genetic results stunned researchers. For more than a century, historians believed that the brilliance of the Minoan world, its art, architecture, and power, must have come from somewhere else. Some said they were Egyptians who had crossed the sea. Others argued they were invaders from the east. But when the DNA analysis was completed, the truth silenced them all. The Minoans were not outsiders. They were born from the land itself. Their DNA traced back thousands of years to the earliest farmers who reached Crete from what is now Turkey and the Aegean coast. These settlers carried with them seeds, livestock, and the skills to shape a new world. Over generations, their descendants became master builders and artists, creating palaces that rivaled any kingdom on earth. What had once been a farming community had transformed into a civilization. But the deeper scientists looked into the genetic data, the more unsettling the story became. The Minoans had lived on Crete for millennia, separated from other populations. This isolation left a clear mark in their DNA. The lack of variation showed that they had tightly controlled their own reproduction. Some experts believe that this wasn't a coincidence. It appeared that the Minoans may have practiced an early form of genetic selection, choosing partners to maintain specific traits within their communities. Skeletal evidence seemed to support the theory. Studies of Minoan graves revealed patterns of limited diversity and close kinship among those buried near the palaces. According to researchers, this suggested that elite families intermarried to keep power concentrated in their bloodline. It was an ancient form of social engineering, a controlled breeding system meant to preserve dominance. There were darker interpretations, too. Some anthropologists suggested that this focus on bloodline purity might have gone beyond marriage. Certain bones showed signs of nutritional imbalance and stress, evidence that lower-status individuals may have been deliberately deprived of food or opportunity to control population strength. Nothing is proven, but these findings hint at a system where life and status were decided not just by birth but by biology. It was a chilling revelation. The people once praised as peaceful traders and artists might have quietly practiced one of humanity's oldest and most dangerous obsessions: control over who deserves to exist. The Minoans had not just mastered nature, they had begun to shape themselves in its image. To some, this discovery changed everything we thought we knew about the birth of civilization. It showed that progress and cruelty often grow side by side. The same society that created beauty may also have built its power on fear, privilege, and the manipulation of life itself. The DNA had answered the question of origin, but it had not finished speaking. As researchers studied it further, they began to notice something else, an unfamiliar signal, faint but persistent, woven deep within the genetic code: health, society, and lineage. the DNA of daily life. According to reports, a few samples from the Minoan DNA study showed something no one was prepared to see: fragments of animal genetic material fused with human sequences. Most scientists dismissed it as contamination from soil or handling, yet the repetition across multiple samples was difficult to ignore. The idea unsettled even seasoned researchers. Had the Minoans somehow crossed the boundary between human and beast, blending ritual and biology in ways modern science could barely comprehend? Or had centuries of burial simply rewritten nature's script? Some archaeologists saw a chilling link between this finding and the Minoans' ancient myths. Stories of half-human creatures, bull cults, and sacrifices. Perhaps, they speculated, the legends were not pure fiction, but distorted memories of real practices. The evidence was too thin to confirm anything, but it changed the tone of the research completely. What began as a genetic study now felt like an excavation of the human mind, of fear, faith, and control. Beyond that mystery, the DNA revealed clear facts about how the Minoans lived. Traces from their teeth contained the bacteria of plague and tuberculosis, proof that these people lived with deadly diseases long before modern medicine. Yet the same analysis showed unusually strong immune markers. Their bodies had adapted, generation after generation, to survive constant exposure. This resilience may explain how their civilization endured for centuries while others around them collapsed. Even their diet was preserved in their remains. Chemical signatures in the bones matched what would later become the classic Mediterranean menu: olives, barley, grapes, and fish. These nutrients supported both longevity and brain development, showing that their diet was not only cultural but biological strength. It was the first civilization to live as people still aspire to live today: balanced, self-sustaining, and deeply connected to the land and sea. But perhaps the most personal revelation came from studying family lines. Genetic mapping proved that the Minoan elites and commoners shared the same ancestry. There was no foreign ruling race and no imported dynasty. Power stayed within local families, often through close kinship. In some elite tombs, DNA revealed repeated cousin marriages, unions that concentrated wealth and bloodline. What looked like social harmony may have been built on strict control of birth and status. Taken together, the genetic portrait of the Minoans was both impressive and unsettling. They were brilliant survivors who mastered agriculture, trade, and art, yet they also seemed to walk a fine line between devotion and domination. Their blood carried resilience and mystery in equal measure, reminding scientists that progress often hides darker roots. The story written in their DNA was nearly complete, but one final revelation still waited, a truth that would erase the idea of a lost civilization forever. The final revelation: the Minoans never left. The team took the genetic profiles recovered from Bronze Age burials on Crete and compared them with volunteers from the island today. The goal was simple: could any living population carry the same deep signature found in the Minoan samples? The results stunned even the most cautious scientists. The closest genetic match was not found in a distant land, but right there, among the people of Crete themselves. The overlap was strongest in families from the Lassithi Plateau, a high valley surrounded by mountains in eastern Crete. According to the studies, isolation played a key role. Geography limited movement in and out, helping to preserve the older genetic pattern. Generations of families had lived in the same villages, often marrying within the region and passing their ancestry down with little outside influence. The continuity appeared clearly in the data. This was not a loose resemblance. It was a direct line. The discovery overturned a century of speculation. For decades, historians believed the Minoans had been wiped out by disaster or invasion, destroyed by the eruption of Thera, crushed under fire and war, or replaced by mainland powers. Yet the DNA told a quieter story. Conquerors came and went, governments shifted, languages changed, but the people themselves remained. The implication was deeply human. The descendants of the palace builders still walk the same roads, work the same fields, and harvest the same olives their ancestors once traded across the sea. They carry within them the same blended ancestry that defined Bronze Age Crete. Farmers, shopkeepers, and teachers living on the island today hold, within their own blood, the record of Europe's first great civilization. Some locals had long claimed that their grandparents' songs, dances, and harvest festivals were ancient. Now science had given those traditions a genetic foundation. This did not mean Crete had been frozen in time. Later visitors and rulers, Romans, Byzantines, Venetians, and Ottomans, left faint traces in the island's gene pool, but they never erased the foundation. The Minoan core survived, especially in mountain regions like Lassithi. where families guarded their land and customs for centuries. Crete absorbed newcomers, but never lost its identity. It adapted, resisted, and outlasted them all. According to unverified local accounts, the revelation changed how some Cretans saw themselves. Family legends that once sounded like folklore began to feel like history. A grandfather pointing to an olive grove no longer spoke only of land. He spoke of inheritance, a lineage that stretched back to the builders of Knossos and the guardians of Europe's first culture. DNA just rewrote one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, but it might only be the beginning. Which ancient people do you think science should investigate next? Leave your theory in the comments.